David, the symbol of freedom of the Renaissance, the most famous statue in art history. Its creator, Michelangelo Buonarroti, is gifted with talents that enable him to achieve unprecedented things.
He's
in love with art. It's a deeply passionate relationship.
Di profonda passione.
Passion that has its origins in earliest childhood. Michelangelo was a newborn when his father, Ludovico Buonarroti, an impoverished Florentine nobleman, gave him to a wet nurse in the country. This is the custom in aristocratic circles, even if his father can hardly afford it. The little boy enjoys a lot of affection with the stonemason's family and comes into contact with the material that will shape his life.
You make it like this, and I will make mine like so.
Michelangelo later jokingly recounts that his fate as a sculptor was shaped by those years when he drank marble dust with his wet nurse's milk.
And the rhythm of the hammer becomes his heartbeat.
That's very good. Yeah, you're doing it really well.
Like this.
Just like that. Yeah.
He is not yet 3 when his father brings him back to his parents' house in Florence. Michelangelo's mother is dead, and his father is left alone with 3 adolescent sons. He is heavily in debt and has brought ruin upon the once noble family. The father vents his resentment on his sensitive and artistic son.
Michelangelo must have suffered a lot because of his father. He beat him. He actually wanted to prevent him from becoming an artist. He himself tells his own story as one of resistance against this paternal violence. That's important for him. At the same time, he can never get away from the man.
It will remain a love-hate relationship throughout his life, perhaps spurring his love of art even more. The Temptation of St. Anthony is the only surviving painting of his childhood and already shows his extraordinary talent.
Michelangelo has painted it in tempera, added color, and we can see that he tightened the group, so the figural group is like a sculpture in the space of the painting, so that all our attention goes to the figures. We're looking at the painting in natural light on the left, and on the right, we're looking at the painting in infrared reflectography. And for me, what was really interesting was to really think about the vocabulary of these little stick figures that appear in the underdrawing in comparison to the drawings by Michelangelo on paper. You see the same kind of quickness. And this is a kind of technique of figural abbreviation that Michelangelo uses throughout his career. Importantly, we see that this is part of his language of sketching.
He grows up in a time in which the ideals of antiquity blossom anew and humanism places mankind at the center, an intellectual movement promoted by the Medici. Lorenzo de' Medici is both a despot and an admirer of beauty. He collects ancient art and supports talented artists. Thus, his court becomes the cradle of the Renaissance. His art agent discovers the talented Michelangelo.
Ciao. Ciao.
Against his father's will, he learns the marble craft in the Medici workshop, following the models of antiquity. And, just as a small child, he is captivated by the white stone. When his patron, Lorenzo de' Medici, dies, Rome becomes a refuge for Michelangelo. The eternal city with its ancient monuments, this is his world. The art scene takes notice of him, and soon he receives a unique commission from a French cardinal. He is to carve the Mother of Jesus, a life-size Pieta with the body of Christ. What a challenge for the 22-year-old artist. Unlike in painting, where corrections are possible at any time, in sculpture, every stroke with the chisel has to be spot on.
He concentrates exclusively on his work. He hardly eats, he doesn't sleep, he doesn't go out. Michelangelo devotes all his strength to the work. He knows that it requires his whole life. Nothing else exists for him.
The pressure weighs heavily on him. The statue is to be the most beautiful marble work of art in Italy. In view of the abundance of antique statues in Rome, this is a bold demand from his client.
We have
letters from his father, who was very concerned about the dire conditions under which his son was working. He had been told that the boy was locked up in a hovel to work on this sculpture.
For 2 years, he works almost incessantly on his vision of the Virgin Mother with her dead son. His Pieta is a sensation among his peers. Maria is unlike the traditional figure of a woman bowed in grief. And Christ on her lap is not a typical man suffering with pain. Nothing on the spotless body is marked by mortal agony. The veins on his hand are plump, as if pulsating with life. No artist has dared to portray the theme in this way ever before.
This stark juxtaposition of suffering and death on the one hand and aesthetic beauty on the other. It's something that just convinced people instantly. We are looking at something special here.
The Pieta is the only work Michelangelo ever signed. After that, he no longer has to. He is world famous. He sends the lavish fee to his father, but keeps almost nothing for himself. During his time in Florence, Michelangelo wants to explore the human body in detail. At night, he steals into the Santo Spirito mortuary to dissect corpses. Andreas Plaginger has analyzed the significance of dissections in Michelangelo's work and studied their role in Renaissance science and art.
Here we see an anatomist at work. He has placed his hand on the open corpse and is giving explanations. Michelangelo was also famous as a master anatomist, and this fascination with the human body and its anatomy, which was of course visible to contemporaries, naturally also led to people asking how these works came about.
Anatomists were quite often accused of corpse theft and murder. What fascinated him most about anatomy was the nature of the musculature. He knew exactly where each muscle was located and, typical of his time, began to make scientific records of the human body. In 1501, Michelangelo returned to Florence at his father's insistence. The citizens of the city have a very special commission for him, a biblical figure for the cathedral. Hence, they carry the colossal block to him, several tons in weight and 7 meters high. It takes the men 4 days to erect it. It's unimaginable what would happen if it were to crack.
These were also dimensions that had been used to represent gods in antiquity. And that's where he saw his chance. He wanted to measure himself against the great works.
Michelangelo has a high wooden fence built around the block as a screen, for fear of spies and the theft of his ideas. He planned something highly unusual for the time. It would be possible to walk all the way around his David. Once again, Michelangelo works like a man possessed. His contemporaries report that he even goes to bed with his boots on. He uses every second to contemplate his sculpture in advance, so that no miscalculated blow destroys the work. The unveiling of David is a triumph. An anatomically perfect body as an expression of the freedom and sovereignty of the spirit that knows no subjugation, Michelangelo's David need not fear any Goliath.
He was a humanist through and through, and you see that in David. He doesn't show the brutal act itself against Goliath, but what he shows is reflection. His act is planned, despite his physical beauty and the strength he radiates. And that is the ideal that Michelangelo wants to see embodied.
A new pope summons the famous sculptor from Florence to Rome again. Pope Julius II wants 40 sculptures as magnificent as David for his tomb. Michelangelo spends months breaking 40 marble columns out of the mountain himself. But then the Pope changes his mind. The artist should rather paint the vaulted ceiling of the Sistine Chapel with the 12 apostles. Michelangelo is furious. All that preparatory work for nothing. Besides, he's a sculptor, not a fresco painter.
And then he said, 12 apostles, that's a paltry request, I want more. And you might think, okay, now you're an artist and the Pope is the Pope. He's actually in charge, so you should really show your willingness to compromise. But Michelangelo was not willing to compromise. Looking for trouble is what you say today.
And Michelangelo gets his way. A ceiling fresco entirely according to his ideas. In place of a resplendent starry sky, he now wants to paint none other than the creation story.
Michelangelo
is the first artist aware of the value of his art. This awareness leads him to place himself on, today we would say, almost equal footing with the Pope.
Such insolence.
You're too slow.
Especially as the sculptor has hardly any experience with the fresco technique.
Look after the colors.
What's more, his client's expectations are immense. The Sistine Chapel is one of the most highly consecrated rooms in the Vatican.
It's a gamble for the Pope to commission such a difficult painting from a sculptor who basically feels like a sculptor. But it's also a gamble for Michelangelo to accept the commission.
He enlists the help of fresco painters from Florence, but he soon dismisses them again.
Michelangelo is portrayed as someone who is a loner, who does not work well in a team at all. In fact, he wants to do everything himself.
He begins with the flood. But he quickly fails due to his inexperience. The fresco becomes moldy. Michelangelo has to chip it all off. And start again.
In a moment of difficulty, he wrote to his father, "It's my fault, because I was too presumptuous. It's not my job, but I wanted to do something I was not able to do."
The added pressure to complete the work does not ease his self-doubt. It is said the impatient Pope threatened to push him off the scaffolding if he did not finish soon.
Michelangelo is certainly an artist who struggles. Once he made a drawing about how hard the work was, having to paint the figures overhead all the time. He also struggled with the techniques until he found the ideal form.
And he finds it quickly. He uses the raw plaster as a color surface with virtuosity. That saves time.
In Michelangelo's hands, the fresco progresses quickly. Then, within a few months, Michelangelo becomes in fact the greatest fresco painter in the world.
He will create a fresco the likes of which the world has never seen before. At the center of the creation story, God creates Adam. a hymn to man in the image of God, his contemporaries rave.
God's not an oversized God the Father who creates a little Adam, but the two are at finger level, so one inspires the other. It happens together. It happens in dialogue. The fingers are not touching each other. It's simply the pointing finger, the idea, that is transmitted. Man is God's image, but that also makes him independent and autonomous in a way. We must realize that he was working on a scaffold, or in any case at a very close distance, and therefore had to imagine the view from the ground.
Since the boards on which he painted prevented him from seeing from below, Michelangelo was left only with his imagination to picture himself in the situation of the viewers 20 meters below. In this, he benefits from his skills as a sculptor. This is impressively apparent in a tiny detail of the fresco, Adam's foot.
In Adam's case, he has prepared the fresco in great detail, with engravings in the plaster. Only the foot deviates from this. Instead of sticking to the pre-drawn engraving line, he enlarges the foot so that it has the right proportions for the viewer below.
But proportions are not the only challenge. To compose a virtuoso overall work on 540 square meters of wall space requires good organizational skills. But how? When most of the figures are already emblazoned on the ceiling, Michelangelo has a brilliant idea. He structures the ceiling with deceptively real architectural elements, columns, for example, which he embellishes with naked youths, the Ignudi, angels from the creation story. Originally, they were supposed to have wings, but he omits them. Instead, he stages them with perfect human bodies. And with human poses and gestures.
May I? This is good.
What is also striking about the Ignudi is the movement of their bodies. This makes them appear almost weightless and adds an air of self-assurance to the display of strength.
When we look at both Michelangelo's sculpture and his painting, we realize that these are not natural proportions. The beauty of Michelangelo's painting and sculpture lies in the exaggeration of anatomy.
How he perfects his physiques is apparent in his preparatory study for the Libyan Sibyl, which is also part of the ceiling fresco.
Every time that I look at this drawing, I feel that I can look at it again and again and again and find new things. And here, for example, we see the muscles tensing underneath the skin, creating these fantastic patterns that seem so dramatic about the figure. It's as if the musculature becomes the protagonist of the body and the image that is being depicted.
Michelangelo thus gives his figures a unique presence in space. He makes the bodies practically tangible. The ceiling fresco is finished in 4 years. It's a triumph. Michelangelo attains the aura of the painter of God. Michelangelo is already a legend in his own lifetime. His hometown of Florence overwhelms him with commissions, but war breaks out. David's creator flees to Rome and will never return. He is now almost 60 and moves back to the center of antiquity. Although the Pope knows about his critical attitude towards the Church, he commissions him to design the altar wall of the Sistine Chapel with the Last Judgment. And Michelangelo will use the commission to express his vision of the end of the world. Like an action film director, he stages almost 400 naked bodies between resurrection, heaven and hell around Christ the Judge. Michelangelo does not distinguish between the damned and the redeemed. No one is spared.
That is the difference to earlier judgment portrayals, that even the saints have to face the judge stripped and naked. And that was a scandal. No monk's robes and no royal robes can protect them. Only the judge decides.
Michelangelo creates his very own dramatic vision of heaven, and above all, of hell. Those who are damned are dragged down by the henchmen of the underworld.
In generale possiamo dire questo, che Michelangelo era...
We can assume that Michelangelo was deeply obsessed with the idea of the agony of death and eternal life, which gave him a sense of bewilderment, that sense of eternity changing forever. And that is what we observe in the fresco. It is a fresco of enormous drama.
Michelangelo worked on the Last Judgment for 5 years. 5 years in which he again devoted himself completely to his work, to the point of physical and mental exhaustion. And once again, he paints demons. His own, perhaps. Michelangelo is not only dedicating himself to his work, he is also documenting his very own deeply felt faith.
Man is not saved because he follows the precepts of the church, but because he behaves in a certain way in relation to God. This is a call to personal responsibility.
A newly elected pope approaches him and says that he should please paint over the naked bodies in the Last Judgment so that everything looks decent. And he replies, "Holy Father, I'll be happy to do that. Just one little thing. Make the world a decent place, then the pictures will be decent too."
On the 18th of February, 1564, Michelangelo died of a fever at the age of 89 in his simple home near the ancient forums.
Michelangelo was very robust until his death. He worked, sculptured, and rode around Rome on horseback. He worked right up until his last day.
He dedicated his life to the search for reality, for truthfulness, for the soul of things, and thus also for the eternally enduring.
Michelangelo is the first person who can be said to have been truly revered like a god.